Welcome to the inactivity era of the UFC. Starting with the champions outside of our Lord and Savior, Alex Pereira, who comes to save the show every time the UFC needs saving, it feels like most champions get to pick and choose who they fight and when they fight. Jon Jones is by far the worst example, or I guess the best example of this phenomenon, as he has gone a year and a half without fighting and expects to return with a fight against Stipe Miocic, who himself hasn't fought in over 3 years. This has forced the young, prime, healthy Tom Aspinall to himself be inactive for 9 months, despite knocking out Sergey in his last outing around a minute into their fight, and additionally is forced to defend his interim belt. Leon, before his fight with Colby Covington, was literally holding up the entire welterweight division and even had contenders not fighting since they were waiting for their respective chance at the belt. If you add on top of this many champions wanting to pursue double champ status instead of fighting the contenders in their own division, then you have another example of champions holding up their division to try to make a fight work out with another champion. And speaking of fighters wanting to pick and choose their fights, this couldn't be more evident in the case of Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor. I made an entire video on the matter, but this fight was announced all the way back in February of last year. Michael Chandler hasn't fought since November 2022 when he lost to Dustin, and Conor, who I don't even consider a UFC fighter anymore, hasn't fought since he also lost to Dustin in July of 2021. Inactivity in the case of Khamzat Chimaev has completely destroyed his hype, career, and aura that he once had as the monster at 170, and I've made another video detailing this situation, but Khamzat went from one of the most hyped prospects we've ever seen to fighting once a year and promoting crypto scams more than he's promoting actual fights. And I love Shavkat Rakhmonov, and I truly believe that he is going to be the guy to take down Leon Edwards amongst the welterweight contenders. So it really sucks to see a rising star and potential champion be sidelined due to inactivity. The last time Shavkat fought was back in December of last year, and a deadly and exciting fighter like him shouldn't be inactive, especially with all the matchups he could be potentially making. Considering Leon is fighting this Saturday, is going to take another 6 to 7 months off to recover and prep for Shavkat, we likely won't be seeing Shavkat fight until the end of the year or early next year depending on Leon's schedule. And speaking of this Saturday and Leon, UFC 304 is sure to be a good one this weekend, and you can get even closer to the action by checking out my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. All new customers who bet $5 get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code TJLovesFights. The crown is yours. If you're wondering what you could use your bonus bets on, you can use them on DraftKings same game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout by combining multiple bets together from the same fight. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. DraftKings is the one-stop shop for all things daily fantasy, where you can join in on all the fun and have the shot to win cash prizes. Again, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code TJLovesFights. Bet just $5 to get $150 instantly. Again, that's promo code TJLovesFights only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. And that blows. It feels like all of the fighters we want to see fight are constantly inactive, and all of the fights we want to see happen are up in the air. So why is this happening, and most importantly, how can we solve it? The problem of inactivity in the UFC really stems from the freedom fighters have in terms of negotiating fight contracts, and how fighters with enough star power can use it to leverage fights they want to make happen. They might not have the complete freedom of boxers who can completely stat pad their records to the top and egregiously cherry pick their opponents, but the way the UFC is set up can allow for fighters to remain inactive until they get a fight they want to see happen. Unlike most other sports where the athletes there are essentially the employees of their respective leagues, UFC fighters are independent contractors. And like all independent contractors, they choose what contracts they want to sign, effectively choosing when to work, what the work is, negotiate how much they're made, etc., etc. For most UFC fighters, they aren't making enough to be inactive the entire year and don't have the star power to leverage specific fights. So most fighters, even though they're independent contractors, have to basically take all the fights the UFC offers them. Beggars can't be choosers holds for a vast majority of the UFC fighters, and in order to establish a name, go up the rankings, and keep the lights on, most UFC fighters almost become employees of the UFC since they have no leverage over their fights. But the problem of inactivity arises when fighters do get enough star power to be established and do get enough money to not fight anymore. Guys like Conor McGregor and Jon Jones are the quintessential examples of this. Every pay-per-view they headline will bring in the company millions and millions of dollars. So with that type of star power and leverage at the negotiating table, these guys can film movies, fight senior citizens, and simply not fight until they feel like it. This leads to their opponents, or the guys that should be their opponents, to be insanely inactive. And it becomes even worse when there's a belt on the line. At least in the case of Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor, they're not holding up a division. When there's a belt on the line, champions, fighters with the most leverage any fighter can have can absolutely make the rightful contenders very inactive. Obviously, I've been talking about the Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall situation a lot, and a guy with the talent Tom Aspinall has should have fought already, considering the guy he knocked out just fought recently, and Alex Pereira, who fought on the same card he fought on last time he showed, had 2 phenomenal performances since then that has catapulted him to the face of the UFC. This type of forced inactivity has robbed rightful contenders like Tom Aspinall from being stars of their own. And I think another great example of this, in my opinion, is the undeserved title shot of Israel Adesanya. Yet another example of someone who has enough star power to not only fight whoever he wants, but fight for the belt at any time he wants. I understand he was the former champ, had a dominant run at 185, huge star, blah 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 blah, but he's 1-2 in his last 3 and hasn't fought in almost a year. The division, in my opinion, has moved past him, and 185 is so competitive and fun without him. But of course, the UFC is going to market the hell out of the beef between Dracus and Adesanya and the battle for the real African champ. This situation will most likely lead to African-American Sean Strickland, in my opinion, the most deserving contender and deserving of a rematch with Dracus du Plessis, to become inactive. And it's not all Dracus' fault. Sean Strickland versus Robert Whittaker makes so much sense for a title eliminator during this time, especially with his sick-ass performance against Ikram Aliskerov. But Sean has been adamant about waiting for his shot, which means he probably won't fight until the end of the year or the beginning of the next. I already talked about it briefly, but we're seeing the same situation with Shavkat. I understand he's waiting for his shot at Leon, or Bilal, who the fuck knows. But it's unlikely he's going to risk his pretty much guaranteed title shot to fight a contender. But there's so many sick fights he could make. Shavkat versus JDM is a hell of a fight to make, and with Shavkat's cold-ass response to JDM, this should have been the fight to make while waiting for Bilal and Leon, and with JDM's boxing and Shavkat's wild offensive style, this is guaranteed fireworks. And what the hell, even though I think it should be a landslide victory for Shavkat, a fight with Ian Machado Gary, yes, I'm referring to him as Ian Machado Gary, is still there, and Ian did say he wants a fight with the monster. And with his health issues and also hilariously delusionally waiting for a title shot, Khamzat is probably going to be inactive forever with those type of requests. As much as we blame champions for being inactive and or trying to cherry pick their fights, contenders are just as much to blame for the inactivity in the division. Oftentimes when the contenders are big enough to be called the deserving next in line, they wait. And I can see it from their perspective. I mean, why risk a title shot that you've been working very hard for to essentially just fight another contender? I mean, the whole reason why you're on top and deserve a title shot is because you've gone through your share of contenders. But what this leads to is crazy inactivity. We saw this with the welterweight division a couple months ago, as Leon had to take care of Colby's undeserving title shot, which led to Bilal and Shavkat and basically the entirety of the division waiting for the top to move. So again, I understand contenders like Shavkat waiting for their deserving title shot, but that leads to an insane domino effect of inactivity, as a guy like Shavkat is sidelined, meaning other contenders can't fight a top guy like Shavkat to move up, which creates gridlock across the division. And this is why we need to give credit where credit is due. Justin Gaethje did not have to take that fight with Max Holloway and risk his basically guaranteed title shot with Islam. After his BMF title win over Dustin, he easily was the most deserving of a title shot against Islam, but because this fight couldn't be made in the beginning of the year because of Ramadan, Justin chose to fight Max in the meantime and lost his chance. Tom Aspinall is in a similar situation. He could have been a bitch and waited a long time for Jon Jones to beat Stipe, claiming he was deserving for the title and title alone, which he was entitled to do, but instead he's staying active and facing a legit contender in Curtis Blades. Unlike another contender, quote unquote, in this division by the name of Cyril Gane, who is notorious for turning down fights, only poking his head out for title shots, and instead focused on making movies. So how do we solve this? Well, it's clear that all of the problems stem from the top. We've seen like the welterweight division in the past, the heavyweight division now, and possibly the middleweight division soon, how a delay at the top can have rippling effects across the entire division. Undeserving title shots or inactivity amongst champions leads to contenders that have deserving title shots to wait in line and not risk their possible ticket to the belt for simply another fight, which also leads to other contenders not getting a chance to fight the top, meaning we lose out on a lot of potentially exciting fights. So if the problem is at the top, we have to fix it. A champion inactive for more than 9 months, that should call for an immediate strip. Doesn't matter if they were the greatest of all time, a division simply can't work without the champion fighting. Additionally, champions not only need to fight often, but need to be fighting the right guys. Champions fighting guys with undeserving title shots basically holds back the division another 6 months. Look at what happened when Leon fought Colby. All the other contenders had to wait for Leon to take care of business and recover before taking on Bilal, which makes the John Jones situation laughably terrible since he's both holding back the division with his injury and inactivity, and then on top of that is going to hold up the division even more since when he's going to be active, he's going to be fighting Stipe, who is
40 years of age.
And I think we're going to see the same exact thing happen at middleweight with Izzy weaseling his way back for a title shot. But anyways, of course, what do you guys think about the inactivity in the UFC? How big of a problem is it and how can we fix it? Again, thank you guys for always supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next week. Peace.